Hi everyone, welcome to SMIC MUN's first training sessions online lecture, Introduction to Model United Nations. This lecture is particularly for the new members of our club who newly joined this year and are still wondering what in the world MUN is supposed to be. So, let us begin by defining what MUN is. To put it simply, MUN is a simulation of the United Nations where you get to practice diplomacy, research skills, and public speaking. MUN is similar yet very different from debating in mock trials and debate competitions for important reasons. 1. You're representing a country in most cases, or an organization in a committee that has its own special function. 2. The people debating in the same committee are not always your opponents, and the key is to make as many delegates as your friends and win their support. 3. You're not just simply arguing MUN, but you almost always have to provide tangible solutions that will benefit your country. These elements make MUN a more complex and intellectually challenging form of debate, and this video is here to help you understand more about it. Now, let's talk about the United Nations, the organization that MUN is simulating. After World War I, America's former President Woodrow Wilson proposed to create the League of Nations, which is the world's first international organization established to maintain peace. It had a lot of weaknesses, and the United States itself was not part of it. And World War II broke out, which shows how League of Nations was obviously a failure, as it did not prevent another global war. And here comes the United Nations after World War II, a much more improved version of the League of Nations. On October 24, 1945, the UN was formed with the ratification of the UN Charter drafted during the meeting of 50 countries in San Francisco. The UN Charter covers the most fundamental elements of the UN, including the purpose of the organization and the different organs, and their individual roles in the UN. All members of the UN must abide to the articles of the UN Charter, which means the delegates in MUN are bound by the Charter as well. You can think of it like a constitution of a country. Whatever policy or law you want to enforce, you always have to adhere to the Constitution. Likewise, anything you propose in MUN must be in accordance with the UN Charter. So, let's take a look at Article 1 of the UN Charter. Article 1 clarifies the four main purposes of the UN, which are, number 1, to maintain international peace and security. Number 2, to develop friendly relations among nations, based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of the people. Number 3, to cooperate in solving international economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems and promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Number 4, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in attaining these ends. It is imperative to keep these purposes in mind when you step into your MUN conference. Another important part of the UN Charter is the division of the UN into different organs. Basically, the UN consists of various sub-organizations. Each organ has a different domain and power. For example, the General Assembly, or GA, is the biggest, but often perceived as the most powerless organ of the UN, where 193 members of the UN are represented equally. It oversees the budget of the UN, appoints the non-permanent members of the Security Council, receives reports from other parts of the UN, and makes recommendations in response to world issues. A GA's resolution can only make recommendations, and it is beyond GA's jurisdiction to request a country or an organization to follow its recommendations. On the other hand, the Security Council, which is responsible for maintaining international peace and security, only has 15 members. However, all UN member states must follow the Security Council's decision. The Security Council can even resort to imposing sanctions or even authorize the use of force to maintain or restore international peace and security. Also important to note are the 5 permanent nations, aka the P5 nations: China, France, Russia, UK, and the USA. These are nations who won World War II and have some of the world's most powerful military. Unlike the GA, where all the nations earn equal representations, the Security Council grants special veto powers to P5 nations that allows them to turn down any Security Council resolution that plays against their interests. Thus, if you get to represent one of the P5 nations in the Security Council, you'll often be expected to lead the debate and wisely use your veto power to effectively assert your country's stance. We have covered the very basics of Model United Nations that you should know in order to become a successful delegate. Thank you for watching. This was SMIC MUN.